Well, hello, everybody. My name is Garrett Schmidt, and I am the managing editor for VBC Exhibit Hall. And I would like to welcome all of you to today's live webinar hosted by Credo Health. And it is called HCC V28 is coming. Learn how to strengthen your risk adjustment efforts. This is a really hot topic. I just got back from a conference that this was all the buzz and all the rage. So we're going to get some really great information about this today. I'm excited to hear from our hosts, who I'm going to introduce in a moment. A couple items of note before we get started. This is a traditional webinar format, so everyone's joined in listen-only mode. You don't need to worry about muting your mic or turning off your camera or anything like that. We can't see you, so don't worry. But we do want to hear from you, and we're going to have some time for some Q&A toward the end of the presentation. And so at any time during the presentation, if you have a question for our speakers or just in general, go ahead and put that into your attendee module. You have a little place for questions, which is different than the chat. So just go ahead and drop your question in there. We're going to get to as many as we can during the allotted time. If we run out of time or we are not able to get to yours for some reason, someone will reach out to you afterwards through email, so don't worry. So even if we're wrapping up at the last second, go ahead and ask your question and we'll get to it. And finally, today's session is being recorded, so what's going to happen is when we're done, another hour or so, you should be receiving an email from one of us, and it will have a link to the recording as well as to where you can download the slides and get a little bit more information and follow up with the team from there if you would like. And without further ado, I would like to introduce very briefly our speakers for today. First of all is Mr. Carm Huntress, and he is the CEO of Credo. Welcome, Carm. And also we got Logan Steele with us, who is the VP of Operations. So welcome, Logan, and I'm going to turn it over to you guys at this time.
Yeah, thanks so much, Garrett, and great to be here today. I'm really excited about this topic. We've done a lot in this area of looking from V24 to V28, and it's obviously a really important area for a lot of organizations to really understand where they are today and where they're going to be in the near future as this is put into full effect over the next coming years. So we're, I'm going to be here really talking about the Credo perspective and what we're doing, and then Logan, as Garrett said, is the VP of Operations at Physician Care Centers of Florida, and give some real world points of view from an actual provider organization that's dealing with this and manages risk across a pretty good sized population. So let's get started. The first thing we just wanted to do is an overview, just in case there's people on the call that are new to this. We've got the first real big thing in terms of changes on the V28 is the fact that we're going to see a big change in diagnostic codes, right? Over 2,000 got removed that were previously there in the V24 model. There was a lot of reasoning behind that, but in general, this obviously changes organizations, focus and where they need to be putting their attention across these codes. Of the sort of 87 HCC categories, 29 had updates. So pretty big impact there. And then we'll see, going from V24 from V28, this phase out over the next few years. So that 34 versus 66 model usage in 24, and then it'll flip in 25, and then in full effect in 26. So this is pretty important and pretty complex, actually, in terms of where organizations are today on V24 and moving to V28. We wanted to just start off. We felt like there were sort of two questions we wanted to get to here in the presentation today, and we wanted to ask you. I think Garrett, is this your opportunity to do that poll?
Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and pull that up now here, and you should see that on your screen, and we'll give everyone just a minute to respond here. And the question is, CMS is expecting a 2% revenue correction with V28. How much do you expect your revenue to change for your organization? This will just help us kind of gauge the audience. This is anonymous, of course. We still got some answers coming in, so we'll give it just a couple more seconds here. Okay, I'm gonna close it down in 5, 4, 3, 2. Oop, had another one come in. 2 and 1. We'll go ahead and close it out now. All right, that'll give us a good thing. And I'm going to share the results. So, Carm, are you able to see this?
I am. So let's have a look here. Really interesting. I mean, I think this is what we've heard a lot of this. I mean, the fact that over half the people attending today are saying, I'm not sure. We don't really know. It's hard to actually figure out these calculations. And we're still in the process of doing that. And I think that's a fine answer for today. Obviously, the sooner the better you can get on top of these things. And we're going to talk about those things that you can do to start moving in the right direction. And then, you know, I think the majority, maybe two other things to highlight here, right? We've got the next big chunk inside of the 20, you know, the 1 to 5%, which I think is, you know, within what CMS has been projecting. So that's good. But look, we've got almost another 10% here, or 20% really, in the 5 to 10 or greater than 10%. And we have seen some organizations we're working with are in that 10% greater. So this can be pretty impactful. I mean, 1 of 10 organizations out there dealing with a greater than 10% revenue correction, that's a big deal. And so there's a lot of things that we want to help the, you know, companies with in terms of mitigating these kind of issues. So great first poll opener here. Garrett, we're going to do one more and then get back to the presentation. Do you want to jump to the next one?
All right, yeah, let's do that. So this next one, I'm going to go ahead and bring it up here. And this is, what gaps do you have in your current risk adjustment process? And this one is select all that apply. So we'll give folks a moment to respond here. This might take a little bit more thought, so we'll give just an extra moment.
And just for those, that last one is we struggle to engage providers to engage we struggle to engage with providers to appropriately code members. That's just a cutoff.
We ran into
from the GoToWebinar might only give us
limit,
character length limit there. So that is that last.
Good catch. Point, yeah. Okay, we still got some answers rolling in here, so we'll keep it open. Okay, I think most of the responses have come in at this point, so we'll go ahead and close it down in 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. Right, and then I'm going to go ahead and share the results. All right, Carmen, you able to see that?
Yeah. Yeah, look at this. This is such an interesting set of answers here. So, you know, the last one kind of won out there. This is one of the hardest things that we talk a lot to provider organizations, and a big part we focus on at Credo. How do we engage providers in the right way? Obviously, you know, they're there to treat patients, not necessarily risk adjust them or V28 and appropriately code them with the conditions they have, and that's a big one. Almost split across the board on the other three. So you know, from we struggle to get the charts we need. We still do everything manually. About a third of people saying that, and you know, we don't have good tools or capabilities to analyze claims, which leads to a lot of this sourcing of the charts and data you need to appropriately risk adjust members. So really great set of answers there, Garrett, and thanks everybody for participating in that. Let's jump back to the presentation and talk more about some of this stuff. So, you know, we really talk a lot about Credo and I love that answer that a third of people said, hey, you know, we still have a manual process. And I know that you know, you may be sitting there, gosh, there's so many more advanced organizations. Well, you know, based on that survey result, you probably shouldn't feel so bad. It's still very, very common. One of the statistics that I share is that phoning and faxing for records to have this data for compliance purposes is still, you know, really the common way we get records back today for many organizations. And, you know, in the US, we still fax 9 billion pages a year of medical record data per year. So phone and fax is really the way a lot of organizations, from the front desks to the back offices to the payers today, to organizations that get records for payers and other organizations today, are doing manual processes. We do think, you know, the other challenge here is from a risk adjustment standpoint, how and when risk adjustment happens and the delays and inefficient code capture. We haven't seen big advances in NLP here as far as we've wanted in terms of code capture. There's still a lot of manual work involved. It's a big deal. And then, you know, as about, you know, 2/3 or more, 75% almost here responded that we're overwhelming providers with data today. You know, a lot of organizations spend a lot of time trying to get data in front of providers so they can appropriately code. How do we do that in a thoughtful way? Either we're giving them too much information or incomplete history. So that's pretty important to talk about. I'm going to switch it over to Logan here, just to talk a little bit about, you know, what we've found at PCC working with them, and sort of general statistics across the industry around some of these challenges that we just covered. Logan, you want to talk about this a little bit? Logan, I don't know if you're on mute. We cannot hear you.
Yep, I was on mute. Sorry about that. I think the results from the poll really resonate with PCC as well, because I think historically, you know, prior to you know, our partnership, we've seen the same kind of burdens with the risk adjustment process as well as the medical record retrieval process, right? Our front desk and our back office staff are spending, you know, a lot of time dealing with medical record retrieval. It's taking away from, you know, the front-facing patient experience, the connectivity that the front desk is really supposed to be driving, and not to mention taking time away from appropriate treatment of these individuals. I think from a data perspective, right, we're also omitting really pertinent information to not only risk adjust and you know, document appropriately, but from treating our patients from a holistic standpoint. I think, you know, sometimes it's 4 or 6 months that it takes to receive these complete documents, and that entire time frame, our providers and clinicians aren't receiving, you know, the entirety of the information to appropriately treat the individual. So it's definitely been a burden before kind of our involvement.
Yeah. And then Logan, be great to have you talk about you know, the current process and you know, what you've been evolving, you know, at PCC, and walk us through this timeline, kind of what you've seen in working at PCC.
Absolutely. And I think from a new patient perspective, right, when a brand new member walks into our facility, the first visit is almost a blank slate, right? We're having to re-engage the member, start a brand new conversation that they've probably had multiple times. So the first initial visit is really just trying to get to know the patient and piecing together a very large puzzle. From there, you know, the providers can make suggestions for tests and kind of diagnostics to screen the member and ultimately build up that member profile, because they're coming in, you know, relatively incomplete. From there, there's a follow-up visit, usually 3 months later, as long as there's nothing acute or pressing with the individual. And then, you know, 4 months later or 3 months later, we're starting to get those medical records in. It's a long process. You know, front desk, back office staff, they're engaging with specialists, the previous primary care individual or provider, to retain these medical records, but oftentimes, you know, that process is delayed and incomplete. And after we get those medical records, then we reevaluate the individual. So we've had the initial tests and labs and screenings, but now we have a more complete picture of the patient health, which should ultimately change the way that our care plans are developed and our treatment with these individuals occur. So now we're having to reformat and reformulate our outlook on this individual because we've received more information. Now, there's two implications here, right? We have the treatment perspective, where we're not getting the whole view of the patient initially to best treat the patient. But if this is done in the latter part of the year, reimbursement from risk adjustment perspective can be pushed out 18 months because of the way that CMS settles. So there's both, you know, revenue and treatment implications here that really are a cog in the wheel today, and we can see real improvement.
Yep. Yeah, and thanks, Logan, for that. And I think the next thing we want to cover is really the payer perspective here, right? This is, you know, Logan was so nice to walk us through what really happens at the clinical level. And we also have, you know, everybody kind of knows the chase seasons throughout the year, but most organizations start with a claims analysis, right? Where they're, you know, saying, oh, these are probably, charts and medical record data we want to get to. And then they insource or outsource chase teams that are, you know, doing phone and fax for medical records. They're maybe connected to some HIEs, or they have direct connections into EHRs and providers they have relationships with. And then they're trying to bring back these charts in three really different ways. One is to do retrospective submission through SAM files. Secondly, they're doing HEDIS gap analysis for closure and identification of those gaps. And then prospective and suspective coding. And a lot of times this prospective and suspective coding goes all the way back to the provider into what Logan just showed us. So, you know, that is probably not the most efficient process and way forward. But this is both, you know, I think a nice way to tee up our next poll here, which is, hey, here's what's happening at the provider level. Here's how sort of payers approach this. And I'm going to hand it back to Garrett here to do two more polling questions. Really appreciate your participation in this, and it'll be great to see the results. So Garrett, you want to bring us through those?
Yeah, let's pull up the next one here. I'm going to launch it, so you should see that. And this one is, what strategies have you implemented to manage risk adjustment? And this is a select all that apply. So if there's multiple of these that are applicable, go ahead and select them. And we'll give folks a minute to do this. A lot of answers rolling in right now. Luckily, we weren't up against any character limits on this one, so you should be able to read all the answers this time. Okay, answers are still coming in. Answers still rolling in, so we'll give everyone another minute here. Okay, I think most of the answers or the responses have completed, so I'm going to go ahead and shut it down here in 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. All right, and I'm going to share the results.
That's great. Thanks, Garrett. Yeah, interesting set of results here. A lot of similarity. You know, I don't really see an interesting standout, right? So it does look like most organizations are doing that retrospective analysis. They're doing those manual chart audits. They're using point of care tools to share HCC gap data, and they're doing that prospective analysis. What's really interesting is really the use of technology here, right? How are we doing, you know, suspecting today and using NLP? That's only one of every 5 organizations said that they did that. But interesting to see pretty common practices, you know, minus the NLP side of this. in terms of managing risk adjustment. So great first poll there. Let's do the next question.
Okay, so let me pull up the next one here. This one is, how well is your organization doing at risk adjustment? And this one, you only want to select one. And it's anonymous, so you don't have to you don't have to say what
Yeah,
you have to say.
yeah. You don't have to plead the fifth here. You can.
That's right. That's right.
Yep. You can answer, and it is completely anonymous. So thanks.
And this will be good to gauge the other folks in the audience too, just so that you can kind of see where you stand among. You know, we got 200 people on the line today, so show you a good cross market here. Okay, so we got some results still coming in, but I think most people have answered at this point. I think this is something you kind of know pretty quickly. So we're going to go ahead and close it down in 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. Close. And then I'm going to share the results.
Yeah. So really interesting spread. About half people said right down the middle. We're about average today, so we're not performing above or below our peers. But if you sort of take the last three answers together, right? There's 75, over 80% are either average or below in terms of how they think they're doing. Only 20% here, 18, said they're doing better than other organizations. So 1 in 5 are doing better. So look, I think it speaks really clearly to the need for better performance here. This is a complex area that takes a lot of coordination inside an organization, and there's a lot of things you can do to improve. So let's start to get into that, but so appreciate everybody's answers here. I think this is great. Go ahead, Garrett. So the first thing is, how do we think there's a couple key things here. How do we arm providers and payers with the data they need to be successful? And we think the number one thing, which is a lot of people talked about, right, of how are we arming the providers with the complete picture of the patient's medical history. And that is one of the biggest gaps today, to help the provider understand the patient's medical history and what are their current diagnoses. And that is a huge gap, which we'll talk more about, and how Credo is working with organizations to solve that. The second thing is really, how do we get the most accurate documentation to ensure RADV compliance, right? If you're struggling to have the charts that you need to be compliant, that's a big deal. And, so if your organization is struggling to get that data, that can be a real big challenge. And then really just this whole thing, like, I don't even know what V28 is going to look like, on a revenue basis was most people's answer. Navigating that is really important, and being able to do the analytics and analysis to understand what the next 3 years is going to look like for you and your organization, moving from V24 to V28. That's going to be critically important. So these are 3 of the biggest areas we talk to organizations about. So we're going to go on the big ticket items here that we think are sort of really important to do, and then where we focus at Credo, and how we're helping organizations on a few of these things. Obviously, this does get back to that knowledge and understanding of the V28 model. Are you getting the right education and understanding and diagnosis mapping to the new ICD-10 codes and the 2000-ish changes that that we're all going to face here moving to V28. The second thing that we really want to emphasize is provider education. How are you helping providers understand these changes, and the providers that in your networks that you're working with, or maybe you're in a provider organization, how are you getting that information into providers' hands to understand the changes here? And then, it's also doing a lot of legwork to understand where you've got patients with the greatest opportunity for gap closure, and encourage them to book an annual wellness visit or see their provider so they get appropriately risk adjusted. And that's a big challenge for a lot of organizations that maybe have unengaged members or patients that they really need to see and better understand their conditions and their current diagnoses. The next thing is really really what we believe very firmly at Credo, if you sort of compare the traditional services to how can we really start the risk adjustment process before the patient's first visit, and how do we start to the last point, automatically get the records and retrieve and analyze them coming into a visit with a provider. And we think these last two are really, really important, and we're going to dive into those a little bit more. So what we're going to talk about is sort of what we've developed at Credo to help at-risk organizations, both payers and providers, really succeed in value-based care and doing risk adjustment and in V28. So the first thing we really focus on is retrieve, and that's our ability to get records both digitally as well as manually. And so we have two tools that do that today. One is called Chart Copilot, which we'll talk more about in a minute. And the other is called ChartFast, which is our manual process of getting records if we can't get digital charts back through our Chart Copilot capability. The next is our analysis tool. So we are, one of the first companies using AI and large language models. We have something called HCC Copilot, which is using these new large language models. You might have heard of ChatGPT and things like that, to go through and identify conditions within medical records, especially within the unstructured data, to help better make recommendations to providers of current or suspective or prospective conditions the patient might have. We are also working on HEDIS gap closure. That's not as much related to V28, but obviously from a quality gap perspective, that's really important. And then this big thing that we talked about of how do we engage providers? And we've got specific integrations into the EHR to try to make this really easy on providers today, and help them get this information and close these gaps that are out there today. So we talked a lot about from Logan how the current process works today, and what the future could look like. And so what we really did is say, well, what if we start coming into a patient appointment, and we get the demographic information, and then our retrieval services. What's really exciting about this is our capabilities today, and we'll talk more about this, don't require a release of information. And we'll talk about this on the next slide, but we go out, we get demographic information from a provider today. We go out and we have connectivity to some of these national networks that are starting to be regulated under new regulation called TEFCA, the Trusted Exchange Framework or Common Agreement, where under treatment use cases, we can pull data on these patients. And we have reached today, we think it's hard to get exact numbers because of sort of how these providers roll up, but we know it's north of 85,000 providers today. We pull that data in, we synthesize it, and then we both use AI and ML technology and humans to analyze these records. And then once that's done, we produce a clinical summarization that then we push back to the provider as they're coming up and seeing that patient. And so this is really talking about and ensuring that the patient and the provider have that best first encounter together, and the provider is prepared and has complete medical history on the patient coming into that encounter. And today, as Logan said, most of the time they start with a blank slate. So we're really changing all this. And the last thing I'll say before I go deeper into some of the things that we've done around these technologies is, this is really informing the doctor with everything they need coming into that first appointment. So it's not sort of a 6-month lag to get all the data together and help the provider make the right decisions around the patient's conditions and how to treat them appropriately. So it's really a whole change from that existing or the payer way of doing it right off a claim, which would be very much further down the road here. After the patient's seen by the provider, and then there's claims analysis done, they might get suspected there, and that suspect then flows back to the point of care. We're trying to say, let's do that all up front and get all that history before the patient's ever seen by the provider. So our first, the product we just, talked about in that first step is pre-DX retrieve. So we can get most records back in 5 minutes. Which is a huge difference from if you think about phone and faxing and how that can take days or weeks. This is a huge step forward. Hey, Garrett, I'm just going to pause for a second. I think I might be showing the wrong screen here.
All right.
Are you seeing the V20 or how to prepare your organization?
Let's see. We're saying retrieve all outside digital records.
Okay, thank you. My GoToWebinar is giving me the different.
Sorry about that.
I just wanted to check in.
We're working
Thanks,
live
Garrett.
here, folks.
Yeah, thanks everybody. So, the first thing is that immediate response, getting these records back quickly. We work with a lot of organizations that need this data back within 24 hours. And so we try to meet those needs, especially if they're seeing the patient the next day. The second thing is we don't need, under how we're regulated into the networks today, as long as you're seeing and treating a patient, we do not need a release of information, which is a huge time saving and effort savings from clinical staff who are going out trying to get this data together. Excuse me. And then obviously seamlessly integrating this into your organization. We, with the provider organizations we work with today, a big focus is that operational savings and how we can help organizations save time with their clinical staff or front desk staff in having to get this data together and really moving that effort onto us to get the records together. And the last thing I'll say is, as we talked about with our chart fast capabilities, if we can't get the records digitally, we still have a team that can manual chase. So maybe there's a specialist that you really need data on. We can get that for you coming into that visit at very low economic costs, opposed to your own staff doing it. And then our analyze tool is both an annotation tool that we have that our risk adjustment team uses, as well as we can give this tool to your internal teams if you have your own risk adjustment staff, where they can go through and annotate these records to identify key conditions or other information that's critical for the provider to see. One of the things we do though is we pre-process this data using some of the new large language models, and we've had very good success with this, where it's highlighting and bringing attention to that risk adjuster to say, hey, here's areas you need to look across the data we've gotten back digitally to help them better code the charts and data. And these are all, we have sort of what we think world-class risk adjusters and people to do this, to make sure that we're meeting all the compliance and regulatory demands in today's market. And so then the last piece is really getting this back to the EHR. So we have relationships today where we can overlay this into your EHR. We can push this data back as a PDF, this summarized and aggregated view of this patient, again, pre-visit, to really have the right information getting to that provider at the point of care. And so we really care a lot about integration. We do think all this stuff needs to be integrated into workflow. We're not a big proponent and haven't seen really any success for, in terms of payer portals or other things that make the provider's workflow more cumbersome or going to other tools. It's really about having those deep integrations into the EHRs that make all the difference in the world in terms of providers appropriately risk adjusting patients, especially into the V28 model. So I wanted to jump in. We're heading towards the end here and are getting close to Q&A, but I wanted to talk a little bit about what this really means in the real world. And so if you don't know Wakely is an actuarial firm similar to Milliman, and we partnered with them to do an analysis for us. And so this was for a population on the East Coast This was a statistically significant population. Using both our digital and manual capabilities, we had a 98% success rate of getting records back on patients, which was great. And this is sort of shocks a lot of people. But we got 19,000 documents back on these members. So we got a huge amount of data. Remember, this is pre-visit, right? And then we did all this analysis and using our Predix Analyze tooling, went through all these records. On average, we had about 71 records per patient. A lot of people ask, well, what does that 71 mean? If you actually turn that 71 into a PDF and just turn it into a document that you could read, that's 1,000 pages of medical history per patient. And so it's very exciting in terms of what we've been able to achieve there. But think about having that richness of information and data on every single one of your patients or members going into a visit. And then all that data summarized in a 6 to 10 page report that the provider can read and review and really have a thoughtful and really deep discussion with that patient and their history. So it's really exciting in terms of the amount of data we're surfacing to providers at the point of care. And then this is really what we're most excited about, where we're finding 2 to 4, I'd say, new conditions per patient. And so not only from a treatment perspective and understanding, hey, I've got a patient coming in here, I really now understand their conditions and what I need to prioritize and treat. And getting ahead of that, where otherwise it might take 3 to 6 months to get that figured out. And in our case, under the V24, we saw a 0.445 increase. And then under V28, we saw a 0.286. I'm just going to pause for a minute. Garrett, are you on the line?
I'm here.
And am I having any network issues? I'm just getting a notification.
No,
Can you hear me okay?
We can hear you, see you. Everything's moving right. You're not pausing and weird expressions or anything.
Great. Thanks, Garrett. So, I just want to make sure everybody understood, we really feel like this is a dramatic improvement. And again, this is new HCC value found, right? This isn't existing. This is on top of what the payer provider already had on these patients. But this is net new under V28. So pretty dramatic impact. And when you think about your change in revenue, as we asked in that early survey question, look at the difference here, right? In terms of the delta and making up, any of that changes in revenue by having a better risk-adjusted patient that first time they go into seeing a provider. So that's some of our results there. And I'm going to turn back to Logan because we've been working with Logan for over a year now in his practices, just to talk about some of the success and some of the results of working with us. Logan, back to you.
Absolutely. And back to one of the previous polls, I think we would consider PCC probably at average or in line with the market in terms of risk adjustment. And we've seen a 15% increase in RAF, which is pretty substantial for our organization from a top line and bottom line perspective. So definitely saw the performance increase that we were promised, and I think I would attribute the majority of that to kind of interacting with the clinicians and the providers. I think typically as a provider group, we're used to getting suspecting based on claims. Which is very difficult to put in front of a provider and expect, redocumentation or documentation in the first place, because there's no supporting evidence. There's no supporting documentation. There's just there's a claim that had this diagnosis. What do you think about it? I think the PreDX solution has really stepped up our ability to, one, educate and then capture prospectively is the underlying supporting clinical data that has allowed us to build rapport with our clinicians and buy-in to ensure that we're appropriately capturing conditions, but also providing that holistic view of the individual, of the patient. It's not enough just to say that a patient has heart failure. The clinicians typically want to see, what's the ejection fraction? What's the most recent echo look like? And that's the kind of data that PreDX is providing. We've also experienced significant, cost savings from a time perspective from our front desk and back office, which has allowed our in-center individuals to deal more closely with the patients and build that relationship instead of having to work on phoning and faxing and retrieving medical records, so greatly decreasing that administrative burden. And in doing all this, we're able to support our patient population through knowing them the day that they begin at our practice. We're coming, the individuals and the patients are coming in, and we have a complete view of that patient's history. So they don't have to re-engage, they don't have to restart that conversation that they've had so many times. We can jump right in, get down to the best treatment options, and treat the entirety of the patient's medical history.
That's great. Yeah, thanks so much, Logan, for that overview. That's super helpful. So let's bring it to a close there. I hope that was really helpful. This is one of my favorite parts, to see what questions we have. And hopefully, Garrett, we generated some interesting questions, and we'll pass it back to you to go ahead and pass those along.
Yeah, for sure. So yeah, we did have some questions. So, and as a reminder, in order to ask your question, go ahead and submit it using your control module. There's a little space for questions, which is different than the chat. But if you go ahead and drop your question in there, if we don't get to yours today, then someone will reach out to you through email afterwards. But let's go ahead and jump in, no particular order here. First question is, how long does it take to implement PreDX at a typical practice?
That's a great question. I will say our usually standard way of implementing is actually starting with new patient onboarding, mainly because those are the patients with the greatest need, right? You have no data on them typically. So we usually start to that. That usually is a 30 to 60 day ramp up to get it going on new patients. And then we usually have I'd say another 2 to 3 months to then work a process for the rest of the population. So soup to nuts, you're sort of talking a 5-month timeline, but in that first 30, 60 days, we get going with the new patients. We build up a cadence with, operationally in terms of how does this play into workflow and getting those new patients. The two key points of integration that we have to work through are, right, okay, well, where's the list of patients that have upcoming visits? We need to get that data out. And that's usually a scheduler feed or something like that. And that's actually pretty easy, or a roster to get to. And then it's about pushing the data back. And where does that need to fit into workflow? Is there anything we need to upload into the EHR? Also supporting documentation and history that we want to put into the EHR. It's really figuring out those 2 points of integration over those first couple months to make sure that's running really smoothly. But that's sort of a typical timeline for our implementation.
Great. Next question is, what EMRs are you guys currently integrated with?
Yeah, so we have the two main ones we work the most with and have a lot of experience, and they're on some of our slides, is Athena and ECW. We have very good integrations. There's many more with some partnerships we have to do EHR overlays that we can go in. I think there's a total of like 25. If you have a specific EHR that you're looking for us to integrate into, please let us know. And there's different levels of integration. There's everything from, hey, we can upload a PDF summarized report that the provider knows where to look for, and they can go through that summarized report, pre-visit, which is a very light integration, all the way up to, a sort of EHR overlay where, we're showing that HCC gap data, and the provider can instantly add that data into the encounter and accept that suspect code, for instance. So those are different levels of integrations, but those are the two, Athena and ECW are the ones we mainly work with. If there's others that you want us to get into, just ask, and we can let you know, whether that's an Epic, a Cerner, a Greenway, etc. More than happy to work with any organization to get those integrations done.
Great. Next question is, you had mentioned suspecting engine. How does that work?
Yeah, so today we really believe you've got to have both technology and humans. we do believe, NLP has taken us so far in terms of using heuristic-based models to identify potential codes. The future here is really using these large language models, and we're in the early phases of this. The models today to do suspecting, and the way we do it today, is it's basically a tool to drive the efficiency of our risk adjusters when they're going through these 71 clinical documents. We're essentially highlighting the key areas in the unstructured data where there might be a condition that needs to be reviewed by the provider that could be suspect in nature. We are working towards what we would call sort of condition-specific models, for instance, around diabetes or other critical conditions that need to be looked at. But what's really exciting of going where we are from today, which is sort of highlighting key areas to review inside these charts supported by human intervention, is we think there's a future state within the next year to 2 years where we can have a validated model that is summarizing and pointing back to the clinical evidence around these conditions. And what these models we've seen, and we do have early evidence of this, is they have a semantic understanding of these conditions. So that you can sort of ask these models, why does the patient have diabetes, for instance? And it can say, well, I looked at this A1C, I looked at their BMI, I looked at their glucose, and I might have also found it on a problem list. It can kind of correlate across those things within the record to identify those key clinical markers that give the impression that the patient does have a suspect condition that hasn't been documented. So, that's where, we are today in terms of using sort of highlight and attention and efficiency gains we can get from these large language models and AI, to where in the future, we think we can automate a lot of this technology over the next year or two. So we're still in the early stages, but it's very compelling in what we've seen in terms of our early endeavors to do this within the PreDX platform.
Great question. Next question is, so do you need a release of info form filled out and signed by the patient or POA?
We do not for digital retrieval. So for our chart copilot product under PreDX Retrieve, that is done, and it's a little bit of a regulation. You have to understand the regulations here to answer that question. But under this new regulation, which is going to be in full effect, really starting next year under TEFCA, which I talked a little bit about, and the 21st Century Cures Act, all you need today is to say that there's a treating provider for this patient, and and therefore we can go out digitally and get all this data back across our network on a patient without them having to sign a release. And if you think about why the regulation was able to achieve that today, your treating physician has the right to see your medical record, right? You go walk into an office, you sign a HIPAA release on the day of your appointment. We're just enabling that provider to see the rest of your medical record history that's out there with other providers and hospitals. And so the regulation really enables that. And I think it's one of the sort of really important things, and I'm so glad someone asked this question, that's so powerful, because it gets back to Logan's point, where you're in these, your sort of state of the industry today, is you sort of have that patient come in on that first appointment, they sign a release that day and put in maybe their existing primary care doc and their specialist, and then this whole chasing activity goes off to call those existing offices and get those records. And then at the next visit or the visit after that, you finally get that data back. Without having to do that release and having that consent from that patient, which is sometimes very hard to chase down, we can do that all digitally upfront in 5 minutes and have that all prepped for that upcoming visit. So huge value there, we believe, in our PreDX chart copilot product, to be able to do that upfront without an ROI very quickly. And I think maybe the last thing I'll say is, think about the cost endeavor. If I said, hey, on average, there's 71 clinical documents and history on every patient, we can do that digitally in 5 minutes. If you had to do that manually with your staff, that is just an untenable endeavor. It would be very costly, very timely, and not really work. And so we're really excited about that capability and what we've built at PreDX to help get this history together, for every patient.
Wonderful. Next question here is, if the EMR system is old and not able to integrate, how do you capture the data and provide documentation for audit?
That's a great question. Again, this is where we really emphasize with our clients today the ability both to have digital capabilities as well as manual. So we have a very large operational team. We do hundreds of thousands of manual chart pulls a year, where we have doctors' offices. We've done work in New York and New Jersey, and believe it or not, there's a set of clinics that we work with that don't even have an EHR. They are actually on paper. You have to have people to call, phone, and fax and get those records. So, this is the space we're in today. As the market digitalizes, as we build out national interoperability, this is just part of that in the middle phase where we have some work that is being done digitally, and we can get those records, and then have a manual team to chase those remaining records we can't get, so we can meet compliance and regulatory requirements. And that's really important. So we're firm believers in that, and works very well for our clients. That's why we've been able to see very high success rates, but it's also a compliance and regulatory requirement that we can do that both for our clients today.
Great. And a follow-up question to that is, do you provide what you have captured manually to your providers?
Sorry, Gary, can you ask that once more?
Sure. So follow up to the last question, and it is, do you provide what you have captured manually to your providers?
Yes, exactly, we do. So as part of that retrieve process, remember there's two sort of components within PreDX Retrieve. There's the digital, the chart copilot product, which digitally goes out and gets all those records nationally. And all we need is demographic information to get that data. So first name, last name, date of birth, things like that. And then we have the manual process in ChartFast to pull that data manually. We then pull that data together, what we found digitally, plus what we found manually, and we analyze that data. So it is a combination, and we see a lot of value in doing that. Again, a lot of the time, if you think about a good example is like, we might pull digital data on a patient, and we get data from a hospital visit, and maybe some specialists, but we didn't get that previous PCP data, and we really want to get that. So and the provider we're working with, or the payer we're working with, wants that data. We'll manually chase that and then put that together as part of all the data we have on the patient. So we absolutely synthesize that data together when we do the analysis.
Great. We've got time for one more, and actually this is a good one, and I promise this isn't a seed question, even though it sounds like it is. It says, great job, guys. Although the webinar is focused on HCC revenue, but Credo can impact other areas that are key to success in value-based care: compliance, quality, patient experience, particularly new direction of the star ratings. Can you briefly speak to these?
Yeah, there's so much here. I mean, it's one of the best parts of having the job I have, because I'm a big product focused CEO. I get really excited about a lot of the things that were just in that question. And we are headed in that direction in terms of quality, in terms of stars. I was on a call with a client this morning who was asking us CAPS questions. It looks like you guys could help us, have knowledge around, is the provider up to date on your medical record data? And your medical history. There's really some really good CAPS questions, and a few more that I can't remember right now in there in terms of related to stars. There's things related to, HEDIS, which we talked about, and we're really building out that. We can look very deeply into patients' history. So for instance, colonoscopies that can go back, 10 years, or other measures that can go back 5 years, we can look into that. And then lastly, I think that was a great point on compliance, right? Because we're getting all this history, as you think about RADV audits, as you think about really having a full compliant picture of a patient, we really think we deliver on that in a big way, because we're drawing really from the point of clinical encounter backwards. So not are we supporting that doctor to have confidence in the conditions that are documented, but we have the clinical history there, showing all that information. So we really do feel that. I feel lucky that we got that as a last question, but it's a big area that we're focused on and working on with our clients beyond, you know, meeting the demands of the transition we talked about today from V24 to V28.
And awesome. Carm, if I could just add one thing to that, I think one of the best kind of side effects that have come out of this engagement is the stickiness that our patients have with our clinicians now, right? We look at patient experience as a way to make sure that we're meeting, you know, the standards set by the government, but the churn rates in some of these overly saturated markets are you know, tough to deal with, and our ability to retain our members because they've had a pleasant first experience has been, you know, a really awesome thing that's come out of this partnership.
Yeah, thanks, Logan. Thanks so much for saying that. And Garrett, thanks so much for the webinar today.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, thank you guys. This is very informative. Obviously, there's a lot here, and we are going to have a recording. So I will be sending that out to everybody after the presentation. Give us about an hour or so to do all the processing, and there will be a place where you can also download the slides so that you can share them and review them and whatnot. But as we close out, I'd like to encourage you all to head over to VBC Exhibit Hall, which is kind of our mothership, and visit the Credo Health booth. There's a virtual booth. Carm, if you could go to that next slide.
More than happy to.
Sure, there we go. There's a picture of it there. And there's a lot of great resources where you can interact with the team, learn a little bit more about what they're doing, and just kind of educate yourself. And that way, when you reach out, you'll know exactly what you're asking for and what their capabilities are. But I hope you do that. Again, there's a lot of great things there. And also in our library at VBC Exhibit Hall is where we're going to have archived the webinar recording, so you can see that among others that are there. And then finally, just wanted to thank you guys again for the webinar today. If you'd like to reach out to the Credo team, Carm, if I can get you to go to that final slide.
Yeah, and Garrett, you know, if I want to make sure, because it just came up, that if anybody on the call today wants to do a free pilot with us, that's something we do with almost every prospect and client we've had historically, is you can come and we'll do 20 of your patients or members for free. So you can sign up. We just have to sign a BAA and our pilot agreement, which is really lightweight. And then we'll run 20 patients through and show you the results, and you can really compare that to your current processes. And that's a great way to engage with us, and a really simple way. And that only takes 2 to 3 weeks to do that effort. So always open for that, or to anybody who wants to reach out and connect with our team.
Awesome. Well, their information is here on this slide, but you can also reach out to me directly. I'm happy to facilitate an introduction. But wanted to thank you all for coming to the webinar today. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day and you join us next time.
All right. Thanks so much, Garrett. Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.